So, oh, that's just, you know. Oh, Marion's. It's fine.
More people in there already? I kicked Protrac in the behind, and July 6th now reflects Fire in Paradise for whatever changes we
Okay.
need to make.
Okay.
They don't have it scheduled yet, but we do.
So. Someone was like earlier worried about how messy my office was. And I says, no, he's already seen how messy my office is. I don't know. Ron's gone, so he went on me.
He what?
Ron's disappeared.
Was he here?
No, he was not here. He's actually supposed to be, calling in over Zoom.
Okay.
And I have not heard from him in a week, so I don't know what happened with him. So that's what it goes. But we'll have a nice conversation.
Sure. Oh, do you have cameras in that or what?
Yeah, I actually have a little camera here.
Okay.
And we can figure out what we do. Because I'm actually, this is sort of, I kept trying to turn this into, which became sort of a nightmare, trying to get multiple cameras and trying to figure out what that would look like. Actually, I might be able to do that. Because you have stuff to show, so I might actually have a
How
second.
did my interrogatory do?
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, this was, like I said, it's just a conversation, and just it mostly is sort of talking about sort of your perspective on your life in the North State. And that kind of thing.
Mhm. I brought you some souvenirs. This is my mother's
Oh,
article for the Historical Society. This is Mayor George Flaherty in the Reading years. Mayor of Reading also helped bring TV to Reading. This was Mother's celebration of life. This is,
no, wow, she lived a long time.
yeah, this is Dad's term as DA of Shasta County during the building of Shasta Dam.
I think I've seen this poster. I don't know why.
Yeah. This is articles I wrote on the once highly contentious effort to put a second dam on the Sacramento River down at China Rapids, just above Red Bluff.
Oh, okay.
That was basically killed by fought by Judge Carr, but basically extendedly postponed by James K. Carr, his son, and Senator Oliver Carter of the Harlan Carter
Oh, yes.
basketball.
Yes.
Okay. Harlan Carter's, yeah. This is Judge Carr, my grandfather, and my great grandfather.
Oh, very cool. Thank you.
Yeah. This I put together, which is sort of where our family has concentrated and when. Between the Cons, the Carrs, and the Kennedys.
So I can share a screen. I'm just trying to think.
And this is May 1968 article on Grandpa Carr and Senator Johnny McCall, a Republican and a Democrat, who went to Washington to get the federal money to build Shasta Dam, Keswick, Bryant Dam, and Fresno, and the whole shebang. And this was the article in the Searchlight. Two men thought big. And I brought pictures about this size. They're out in my car of each of my grandparents and the like, and dad and mother if you want. But this was when they were going to build the memorial out at Whiskey Town. Dedication of the memorial, which is a park, and the Park Service has not taken care of the memorial. They certainly have the powerhouse, but there used to be plumbing and a fountain and all the rest of it was built by the Job Corps back in the 60s. It went derelict and the plumbing got vandalized.
So is this where the,
Car powerhouse,
oh, down there, okay.
yeah, where
Yes,
the
correct.
car fire started. And this was from the 1944 covered wagon back in the old days. And that was when my grandfather died. But it's a complete, my Uncle Lawrence Kennedy, his law partner, wrote this.
Yeah.
When he was president of AAA and served on the, let's say during the war, they had a AAA set up a special 7-man committee to envision the interstate highway system after the war. And Judge Carr was on one of those 7. But he died in August of '44, about a month or 2 before I was born. And that was why he couldn't finish the job on the Iron Canyon Dam and kill that, which would have flooded 20,000 acres south of South Shasta County and flooded Cottonwood, Anderson.
Oh, wow.
They would have been underwater, as would Coleman Fish Hatchery, as would Palisadro, Bella Vista.
Where was the dam going to be?
The dam was going to be, where the Jelly's Ferry Bridge is.
Okay.
They're right there is the Table Mountain.
Okay, yeah.
Flat
Yeah, actually, I hiked there before.
There's about a mile expanse. This dam would have been a mile across. It would have created a lake larger than Shasta.
Let's roll.
So what I have is some bits and pieces of video that are playing for about half an hour. I'm actually playing a historical piece we did about 7 years ago about the Pioneer Baby Grave.
Sure.
As part of that, which I had no idea until I did this project. It was a Jewish family, and how they came up here from Red Bluff and they buried the babies. So I was shocked. So it was a good project to be part of. So I'm doing that, and then we're going to talk. And I was, like I said, hopefully Ron will be here, but he's disappeared. I don't know what happened.
I'll be back. I'm going to get those pictures. They might actually, for a visual aid, might help you along with the map.
Okay.
It might be sort of fun to say that I've actually plotted out where the cars, the Kennedys, and the Cons all settled.
Okay.
Then to see them scream out.
It has some sort of weird guy out there with a bicycle.
It's not a, are you okay out there? I don't know.
No, I just want.
Okay, no, that's not uncommon.
And 16.
It's weird that we're having this conversation, but I'm here. It's like you're among these ghosts that paved the way for you. You know, I'm 74 years old, and I'm learning about things that all this time is waiting to be discovered. Amazing, really phenomenal.
It's weird that in some ways you're pining for something. It's not just information, you know, there's something life affirming about it.
You just said it from a patriot. That's the best news I've heard all day.
Makes me feel like a badass. John F. Worrell is charged with fornication. I like it. Oh my God, I'm having a moment. My heart is going pitter patter.
It's kind of dramatic. Sounds like a movie scene I write. This is the point where you reveal I'm not even human. You're from another planet. You're 30% Norwegian.
Why did nobody ever tell me this? I'm gonna call my mom immediately.
I know we've been a great big melting pot, and I don't mind being melted. You want to meet your cousin? Please.
Please tell me it's over. I will be so excited.
This is so beyond what I expected. This has been one of the greatest journeys I've ever taken sitting in a chair. I feel more alive than I ever imagined.
Makes me feel stronger. This is the American dream.
It is. This is priceless. It's my new favorite song.
Major funding for this program was provided by the Paul and Irma Milstein Fund.
Simon Schama brings a unique perspective to the sweeping saga of Jewish history, and we're proud to fund this important program. Please join us in supporting your public television station.
And the Philanthropy Foundation. Additional funding was provided by the Pershing Square Foundation, the Joseph F. and Diane H. Steinberg Charitable Trust, James and Mary Fish, Mortimer B. Zuckerman, the David Burke Foundation, Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Rhodes, the Lembert Foundation, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Baby Charles Simpson Prestige doesn't have any other family, but we feel that we get to help be his family, surrounding with our love and caring. At least once a year, our Sunday school kids, paper, makes a field trip to the baby's grave to learn about him and the trials that his family would have gone through to bring him here for burial. And they help.
I don't know, I can't help you.
Litter in the area and just to beautify the grave.
My mother at a young age, right out of UCLA.
Oh, your mother was UCLA?
Yeah. This is Mary Agnes Kennedy, my grandmother and Judge Carr. His wife. She was the Kennedy side, and Carr Kennedy law firms.
Couple's journey and how it started 160 years ago
Well,
This is
and
my,
ended at the site of
Well,
the
I'm gonna grab
pioneer
them.
British shadow in the 18th.
George Brownstein came to the United States from Russia, which is now part of Germany. There seems to have been a lot of anti-Semitism in Europe at that time, and people were being forced into the army, that's a regular thing, not just Jews. And there's some speculation that perhaps George was trying to avoid military service, part of the reason that he left Russia. He wound up in San Francisco in the early 1850s. At some point, he made his way up to Red Bluff. By 1856, he made graduate school established there, but he ran with his brother.
Your early times could be aware that many jobs were limited to Jews, that they didn't have, for example, companies.
so that's Dad and Mother. This is Dad when he was DA. That's Mother right out of UCLA.
What the profession that has been so forth, teaching.
This is my German immigrant father, my grandfather, my grandmother, and her father, who was a rancher up in Canada. She was a cowgirl out of Canada. He ran away from Germany at 14
During the gold rush, had about
and hopped a sailing vessel in Bremen, Germany. Here's Judge Carr and my grandmother, who graduated from Berkeley in 1905. He graduated from Millville Elementary School. He was 14 years old when he started reading the law in Millville under this guy who was his father, who was an immigrant from Donegal, Ireland, and came to the United States in 1852 at age 19. And he married her, this is his second wife, his first wife died in childbirth.
Well, that's where you're trying the second family kind of.
Yeah, so, and they had, what,
We don't believe in that. There are those who devoutly believe. in
Four
that.
kids,
There are those who
4
have
plus,
a more traditional form of Jewish practice, and those who practice Judaism, both people would consider more, the more
yeah, 4 plus 2,
common
6.
form.
They had 6, and then he had 2
We
by
all
his
come
first
together
wife.
and are able to really celebrate.
Had a total of 8
the
children.
joyous way. And that's one of the things
And
that-
4 of them died before he ever got to Old Shasta.
Yeah, that's just,
But that was, the way it was.
On one of George Brown's.
Who is this again?
trips
That's
to San
Lawrence Carr,
Francisco,
that's my dad.
okay, because he also.
That was his,
Oh, you look long.
that's his campaign picture in 1938 when he was running for DA at 27. 26, he was elected DA of the county at 26.
They met and married there, and then he brought her up.
Does this help?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to use it, because actually, but probably.
We don't have to use it.
No, I think it helps me get a perspective, because I think it's, and like I said, I think it's
It
incredibly
was in
cool.
October of 1860.
And, I mean, it's really interesting, because when you look at old photographs, it doesn't make any difference if you don't even know that.
Story of baby.
It's just fascinating to look at people's old photographs for some reason.
No, he was admitted to the bar. He basically apprenticed under my great grandfather, who had come to California at age 42 and bought a set of law books and took up the study of the law while he taught, was the principal at Old Shasta, and then out of Millville, taught out of Millville. Read the law, was admitted to practice law in 1881. So the Carr family has been in the law business since over a century.
Within 24 to 40 hours.
And he came to Shasta County in 1874 from New York. In New York, he taught for 22 years in a school just down the hill in an Irish immigrant colony, just down the hill from Kingston, which is at one time the capital of New York before Albany was. And then he lost his first wife and a baby in childbirth, and had one surviving child by that marriage, and then he married her. And she was a native of Ireland, Armagh, which is the holy city of Ireland, and also in Northern Ireland. So the religious conflicts were deep between the Catholics and the Protestants.
Mhm.
And the Catholics were pretty much subjugated. They didn't pass the Emancipation Act until 1826, Parliament did.
Mhm.
So they had things called mass rocks, where the priests used to go out in the forest and the glens and hold mass in the middle of the night and spread the altar cloths out on boulders, or what were referred to as mass rocks, to hide their religion from the Protestants. In Ireland, you don't.
You don't think about it, it's just.
Yeah, and then they'd sneak back to their hovels, and most of them worked for these English land barons, a lot of the royalty. And then the famine hit in 47, Black 47, and that's when his father died. And in 1852, 4 years later, he and his little brother, who was 17, came to the United States. He was 19 when he arrived in New York. But he was unusual because he was an educated Irishman. Most of them were not educated. He wound up
Commonly
teaching
referred to as the Queen City.
school
The
and
population of-
studied law under a guy back in New York.
of California gold.
Now that sort of dropped,
What remains of the
and by his second wife, Mary Ann McFarland,
Baby
they
Charles was
lost
buried in the Jewish cemetery.
3
on
of their
3.5 acres.
5 children
Less
to
than a mile
smallpox
north
over a
of
week.
now Shasta State Historic
So
Park.
at that point, he'd lost his
The
first
land for
wife,
the
plus
cemetery
one
was
child
originally ceded
by
to
that
the Hebrew
marriage, and 3 more by his
Congregation
second
in
marriage.
1872.
And
But information on
his
the
younger brother, James, who
congregation had held
owned
possession
a
since 1857.
Shanghai hotel in San Francisco, known as the Portland Hotel, or Portland House Hotel,
Having laid their
which
roots
was
under resident college
the
graduate
location,
loans,
which is now the site of the Hyatt Regency Hotel in San Francisco. James was a mariner, which was his younger brother, who was 17 when he came to the United States. And he encouraged my great grandfather grandfather to leave New York after smallpox epidemic and come west and apply for this job out of Old Shasta, Shasta City, to be the principal. So he arrived with his family, which is 2 surviving daughters plus her, plus him, on July 3rd of 1874. And he spent the next month and a half taking his boards to be able to teach in California. And obviously passed with flying colors and achieved the rank of professor. And came north to Old Shasta and wound up as the principal out of the Shasta Public School for a year, and then they moved east to Millville.
So how, it just, I mean, how do you keep track of all this stuff? It's pretty, you the depth, you're gonna go.
Well, it's a story, okay?
Right, yeah.
And you start thinking, he was 42 when he left New York.
Mhm.
You know, he came when he was 19. He left at age 42 after losing 4 intimate, close family members, his first wife and 4 children. I'm certain he was on it probably freaking down. And his younger brother was, who was very close to him, apparently, said, "Hey, come out west. Things are good here." In fact, his younger brother James was also a master of vessels, mail ships going between Seattle and San Francisco. And he also had this, he was proprietor of this hotel on Sacramento Street, 54 Sacramento Street in San Francisco. I said, "Come west. There's opportunity here." So it's a good story. It's an Irish story.
No, my wife's,
Learned about the
I'm
dedication.
calling her my wife's aunt, but she's not, she's my wife's
About
mother's
200
cousin,
people joined
Alice.
Charles
And Alice
family and Theodore
married
McDonald on that spring day.
late and
for the
late,
dedication
a
ceremony.
guy named James Brady.
Among them was the president.
And they're
of
the Elizabeth
Daughters
Pacifica.
of the Gold
So
Yeah.
he came here in the 30s,
Bronstein.
and I met him
Countless
in the
other
90s.
families
He
who
died
suffered
shortly
loss
after I met
and
him.
endured
It was a big,
sacrifice the same way.
big Irish funeral with the bagpipes and everything, and nothing makes you want to cry like a bagpipe at a funeral. I swear to God, that's like, yeah. But,
When they gave up the culture to comfort.
but it was interesting because he had spent his whole time in the Bay Area in San Francisco around other Irish people.
Sure.
So
Hibernian Club.
exactly, having been there for 60 years, he still had a really thick road, which was fascinating to me. It was like,
Pioneer town of Shasta.
Well, if you came from the old country, just like the Italians and all of them, you know, they retained a certain amount of
Over the lives of
their,
pioneer families.
their heritage, their cultural heritage.
Their dear one of a few short.
Like it or not, they did.
Lonely little corner near the Oregon Trail. And
Judge
they
Carr,
loved
my
the
grandfather, was the first one in the Carr family to be born
one of those pioneer
in
families.
Shasta County.
Nearly 70 years ago.
He was born
one of the great
in December of 1875.
when she left her precious little baby sleeping here all alone.
And in 1907, my grandmother, Mary Agnes Kennedy, the daughter of Michael Patrick and Johanna McCormick Kennedy, she was the oldest of 8 Irish Catholic family children. And my great-grandfather, Michael Patrick Kennedy, ran a dairy farm in Berkeley, which was about 3 or 4 acres. He sold his milk to Berkeley Farms. But his farm was on the site of what is now Alta Bates Hospital in Berkeley. All these people in the family had these real estate holdings that were probably later, if they kept them in the family, would have been worth something. Anyway, Mary Agnes Kennedy was the oldest of the 8 children. She graduated from Berkeley, Cal Berkeley in 1905, which was rather rare, I think, in those days for a young girl.
well, that sounds, yeah.
A young woman in 1905, she got her degree, her bachelor's in letters. And Michael Patrick Kennedy gave her $25 and put her on the train. She was recruited by Shasta County Schools to come north and teach at the Parkville School. You know where the Parkville Cemetery is?
Yes. Actually, we were just
Yeah.
talking with Julie about that.
Yeah. So anyway, and the arrangement with the Shasta County Schools was she was gonna come north. And because young single women didn't live alone in those days, she would live at the Dersh Ranch. And so, this is 1907, she came in to Cottonwood, and the guy that picked her up at the rail station was this guy, who had just been elected justice of the peace of Reading Township, Judge Francis Carr.
Through their efforts, landscaping was cleaned up.
So he put her in his carriage apparently, or whatever, and conveyed her down to Ball's Ferry and across the river and the Parkville Road out to the Dersh Ranch,
Eventually, no matter how you.
where she lived and taught in the one-room school until they married in Berkeley in 1908.
Being in the diaspora.
She died at the age of 58 from breast cancer
There are a lot of different ways to tell that story.
in March 31st of 1940.
In the place.
And that same year was awful because Judge Carr also
And so in Reading.
was a delegate to the 1940 convention in Chicago. And he took my Aunt Barbara,
There's a sense of Jewish history.
his two youngest children, who were young adults,
Usually, it's easier to
my Uncle Kenny, who was just graduated from Shasta High School, and took them to Chicago with him on the train, where he was a delegate to the convention. And Barbara contracted the polio virus and did not manifest symptoms until she got back and she was swimming down at Lake Redding before the dam.
Right.
Okay, and Dad was the district attorney at the time, and he and a young Dr. Whiteside gave Barbara artificial respiration in the ambulance from Reading all the way to Sacramento.
Wow.
And young Dr. Whiteside, who had a couple of children and that, contracted the virus and died. So my aunt lived with that the rest of her life.
Wow.
But she was a brilliant woman and fiercely independent.
Caltrans had
And,
an overlay on it, and it's hard to get government agencies to agree.
She actually was insistent on also living alone as much as she could. She read copy for the Record Searchlight, and she'd have somebody pick her up in the morning.
And a bit of a pathway.
And when I was growing up, it was rites of passage for the boys in our family that you were reaching manhood when my father would trust you enough to lift my Aunt Barb in and out of the car on Sunday mornings to take her to 9:30 Mass at St. Joseph's Church. You know, and when he had enough confidence in you and your strength and your masculinity to be able to handle the task, you were allowed to lift his younger sister in and out of the car and take her to church. You know, all that stuff you just sort of take for granted as a kid.
Yeah. So, you know Rob Burrows?
I do.
Yeah.
Veterans Museum.
Yes. But he's got an old 19 something, 20s or before ambulance in his museum. Have you seen that in there?
I have, and I
Well,
saw it.
it's interesting because it's in perfect shape, and it's from 1920, 1918, and it's like a World War I ambulance. And the reason he had it is because, to get this correct, it's like his grandfather would carry. He bought it because his grandmother had scoliosis, and she couldn't sit correctly anywhere. So he actually bought an ambulance to actually carry her around.
Oh, he did.
And he says that the ambulance was around when he was a kid. And he's surprised that when he was a kid that he didn't break the windows out because he broke everything when he was a kid. But he says it's amazing how well it survived. But it's like the things you do and why you do them. It's just
It's ironic because Barbara actually, like I say, she was fiercely independent. She started an ambulance service in Redding. She and a guy named Boyd Bond. And then they started this ambulance service. Of course, the two youngest children of Judge Carr were Paul and Kenny Carr. And they were killed in the war. The Millville Historical Society, these are the profiles on Kenny and Paul in the Millville Historical Society. This was Kenny. his plane went down and they never found him or the plane in the, they were doing touch and goes off a carrier where they were gonna ship out to the Japan theater. And this is Paul, who was awarded the Silver Star posthumously for gallantry in action. Yeah, he was with the 10th Mountain Infantry and killed in Florence, Italy.
Oh, actually, I have
Like there were about 100 people that attended
Ron.
dedication. It was the dedication. was
Hi,
Hello, how are you?
just fine.
a good job talking about the history of Shasta and how this
All right.
grave happened to be where it was, how it was discovered.
Oh, I'm on the wrong thing. Here we go. See how this,
Just 13 months later.
oh, down here. What happens is I have OV, which is where the main presentation is. And I'll just tell both of you guys now. Ron's here. Ron, you guys probably know each other.
We did.
So what happens is it goes, we actually do our presentation on Zoom. And Zoom goes through YouTube, and then it comes back to what I'm using as my main platform for the event called Obi. And so it's a little sort of a tightrope walk and a little nerve-wracking because you have these multiple technologies with different passwords. And so what's going to happen is after my screening portion is I'm going to come to you guys and I'm going to kind of go over these questions with you guys, and hopefully you'll have like a good conversation back and forth, a little bit about North State and your personal experiences beyond the North State and here, and talk also about some of your guys' knowledge about the North State as well. At least that's my goal here. And my goal is to actually have a conversation that would actually hopefully come from that.
50th anniversary of Charles.
So let me hold
Park
on.
officials brought the stone outside temporarily one afternoon for the current.
I'll get rid of that. So I keep looking at the wrong one here. So I have too many windows I got to keep closed because it's going through too many passages, and I've done this enough times that hopefully we'll make it through it. But so that's my goal. So how are you this evening?
I'm quite fine, except technology scares the poop out of me.
Well, you should actually. I did one of these about 4 or 5 months ago, and I went to send the Zoom meeting to YouTube, and I couldn't get into YouTube, which means I couldn't get it onto Obi. And what happened is my production guy was having some problems with people hijacking his email and stuff. So about 3 weeks before I needed to use it, he had changed the password. And this was, of course, in the evening, and I was at my house. And fortunately, I was able to get a hold of him with like 3 minutes to spare. Otherwise, it would have been, thanks you folks, good night. It's been a great evening, and hope you enjoyed the. So I think, let me see if I can do this. Yeah, we got a few minutes. So I'm going to turn this around so you can actually see it.
That's about 30 minutes.
If we don't do that, we can do better.
Hey, Ron, how you doing?
Pretty good, Pat, and you?
Knocking them dead like Johnny Be Good. We got the Anderson Historical Society here. We got you and me from Anderson Historical Society.
That is true.
How did your thing go on the book presentation and your talk? Good?
The town really isn't aware that Shasta Historical is opening up again. So
I'm not.
people were surprised we were there.
I got you. I'm reading between the lines there. So we got work to do, I guess, but we always do, Ron. How's Candy doing?
Just fine, hiding in the back room.
Where are you located? Are you here in Reading?
Yeah, over by Airport Road.
Oh, that's right, okay.
All right. So yeah, I have
Looks like the triumvirate.
So I'm actually really excited. Hopefully this will be a nice conversation about. Because I keep trying to do something along the lines of, and I probably told both you guys this already, but I really am I've always been interested in local history, and especially finding out stuff that I had no idea that that's what happened, or or entire populations that used to live here. I was doing something, I think it was last year, with Asian Americans, and I was trying to produce something, though it wasn't within the scope of the thing, about the Lim Ranch murders in Chico, where five drunk white guys went and killed a cabin full of Chinese men. But I was really surprised how violent Chico was, and how much they burned out all the Chinese there. Yeah, it was just shocking. It was like, it's just amazing to me that you don't think about it, especially you think about Chico, the thing that sort of.
I was watching your OV section before.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching the OV section.
Yes.
And nobody realizes there's a creek just past Ono named Jerusalem Creek. And
Oh,
by
really?
history, it started by Jewish miners.
Oh, I had no idea.
So there was a town called Jerusalem and a creek named after Jerusalem Creek. One of those, if people are interested in esoteric research you can't find anywhere.
Well, no, I'm really interested in that kind of stuff. So.
What is the name of the creek, Ron?
Jerusalem Creek.
It's Jerusalem Creek. I'll be darned. Huh. Where is it located? Is it out on South Fork Road, or is it?
It's northwest of Ono.
Okay, towards Rainbow Lake.
Yeah. Well, no, farther out.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Out about 5 miles, and then from the road you can actually look up Jerusalem Creek.
Huh. Heading towards Knob. I love the names out there.
Well, the post office made all those names because they wouldn't accept Harrison Gulch because it was 2 words.
That's right, at Knob. Yeah.
That's why Eagle Creek is Ono, and a lot of other towns changed their names.
Change their name. I'll be darned.
So why wouldn't the post office want to name?
They were having problems with identifying things, and originally they denied Ono because there's an Eagle Creek, Colorado. So it makes Eagle Creek COL versus CAL, which is the way they were abbreviating. So that was okay, but they had this real thing about, we don't want any 2-word names. We like single, short, identifiable names. So a lot of post offices had to change. It's like Copper City became Edelpalm because they only wanted 1 word.
Okay, we have probably about 5 minutes, and then we'll. And Ron, did you get a chance to look at the questions I sent you?
I did.
Okay.
Give me that map if you would. Yeah. Ron, did I show you guys at the last meeting? Did I leave one of these at the meeting? This is.
Yes, you did.
Okay, good.
It actually worked pretty good. So I'm just, as a reference, to put stuff up there. It actually looked good.
Did it work out?
Yeah, it worked out good. So hopefully this is like a starting point, because I've been trying to get, I don't know if I told both you guys about the thing we did with Lynn Scott from the Scott's Ranch in Trinity County, and he's a 90-year-old guy, and he's actually the father-in-law of my boss. But we had a presentation where he came in because they own basically the bottom of Trinity Lake, and so he came and talked about. And he actually in the 1950s had the foresight to take pictures of everything before they tore it down, and so we had a really nice presentation. I'm hoping to do more of those kind of things, and so I'm not trying to put you guys on the on the spot here, but I like to actually do stories about both you guys, because I was like, it was just your verbal one, but just trying to read the back of one of your books and all the stuff you guys done, and I've done this for 30 years.
Well, Ron, you were a Vietnam veteran too, right?
4 years.
4 years, that's right. I would submit that we've probably seen a little bit of history, but not as much as many people, you know?
No, it's embarrassing. When I was sitting in one of the clubs one night, and the girls were talking about Vietnam, the Vietnam War. And I says, oh, I was there. Oh, we're learning about it in school. I started to feel really old.
It's history now.
50 years ago.
Yeah.
Were you married at the time, Ron?
No, no. Staying overseas for 6 years is not conducive to marriage.
It certainly is not, yeah. Where did you live before the service?
I was never out. I was born in the service.
Okay, that's right. What was your parents' last duty station?
That's how we got to California, Fort Ord.
Fort Ord, okay. Well, the recruiter told me that I would probably be going to Fort Ord, for basic training. This is when I raised my right hand, I enlisted for OCS. They said, well, you'll probably go to basic and infantry training at Fort Ord. So don't wear anything heavy. But it was in December. Lo and behold, I raised my right hand at the Oakland Army Depot. And they say, well, here's your orders. You're going to New Jersey. I arrived in a blizzard at Newark Airport. And a bunch of us in shorts and tank tops had to make a mad dash for the bus to Fort Dix. That was the welcoming party.
Mine's the opposite. I expected to go anywhere but Fort Ord. Enlisted at Oakland Army Depot. Shipped right back to Fort Ord, where I could see my house from the roof of the barracks.
Oh, that's hilarious. So you did basic and AIT there?
Did AIT in Georgia.
Oh, you did? Okay. At Benning?
I started as mech infantry school and then military police.
Yeah.
Okay, we probably have about 15 seconds. Wow. Wait for this bumper to come up. Okay, let me see, where am I? All right, I want to welcome everybody to the discussion part of tonight's program. And I have with me both from the local historical societies, Pat Carr and Ronald Jolliffe, and we're going to actually talk about some local history, and hopefully we'll learn something. I've been learning quite a bit the last few days from both these gentlemen, and hold on. And I apologize, it's the delay that's confusing me. Okay. Yeah, we're going to try this again. And you're okay. Now we are actually on, and everyone should fear technology because it can make you look silly. So ultimately, as I said before, we are here to talk a little bit about some local history. That's sort of the point of this, sort of tying in with the season 7 of Finding Your Roots with Lewis Gates Jr. And with me in the I'll say in the studio, but here on Zoom because we're still doing stuff virtual because of COVID, but hopefully that'll be sort of changing soon. But what we're going to talk about, let me shut something off here real quick. Okay, so with me, like I said, is Patrick Carr and Ron Jolliffe, both currently from Shasta County. So we're going to talk a little bit about their lives and their perspective on some local history and get some insight. And hopefully you enjoy it as much as I do, because I really enjoy talking about local history and some of the stuff I never knew about. I'm going to have give each of you guys a couple minutes to talk about yourself, bio, and I've been warned that I may have to cut people off if they start talking, but I may not cut them off because I find it too interesting. So I'm going to start with actually with Patrick, and have Patrick kind of give me a little bit of background of what led him up to this point, other than on the Zoom meeting, but in this part of his life.
Well, it's 76 years. Do you certainly want to get the whole thing? I don't
well,
think
just
so.
as condensed as you can. So just
well, anyway, I was born in the North State, raised here in Reading, went to Shasta High School, finished in '62. From here, went down to 4 years in Santa Clara, and graduated '66. And about that time, Vietnam was going in full swing, and wound up for about 4 years in the service after college in first officer candidate school in Virginia, and then to Germany for 2 years, and then finished out in Vietnam. I was commissioned at Fort Eustis, Virginia, and was a second and first lieutenant in Germany, and then promoted to captain. And in Vietnam, basically ran a shallow draft vessel site in Quy Nhon, and then later deep draft vessel stowage operations at the port of Da Nang.
What are the shallow depth and deep depth? Would you like to speak?
The shallow draft vessels are like the LSTs. Where they'll ram the beach. The vessel will open doors on the front end on the bow of the vessel and disgorge. We were bringing in light weapons ammunition and artillery rounds and various sundry supplies for the troops in the highlands and that. So in Quy Nhon, we would unload the ships and also take quite a bit of that. We were running motorized landing craft that were crewed up and down the coast of Vietnam to these other smaller ports. So we would transload off the LSTs and into what they called LCUs, landing craft utility. Put the ammunition and supplies into those landing craft and run them down to Nha Trang or up to Chu Lai, heading up towards Da Nang. At some point in the middle of the summer of 1970, we took over the port from the Navy at Da Nang. So I moved up there, and with that, there were what they call deep draft vessels, which the bows don't open up. These are ocean-going vessels that would be pulling long hauls from the States and would go to the larger ports, Cam Ranh Bay and Da Nang. And with a lot of foodstuffs, reefer ships would go in there as well as dry cargo vessels. Mm-hmm. And I ran an operation that basically we would plan, make the stow plans for the vessels so we didn't sink the ships at sea, and make sure that we were taking all of the different types of cargo, properly stowing them in accordance with Coast Guard regulations, as well as stowage principles, so you didn't cause the ship to tilt one way or another, but to actually be able to brave, extreme sea conditions if necessary.
So when did you leave Vietnam?
I left Vietnam in December of 1970 and returned to the States to, for the first time, see my 4-month-old daughter, who was born while I was overseas, and to retrieve my wife from her folks' grain farm up in upstate Minnesota and head west to Pullman, Washington, where I was entering graduate school to work on a master's degree in economics. Did that for a couple of years. I was a teaching assistant there and actually taught economics, micro and macroeconomics, as well as took my graduate courses. And subsequent to that, because I was enamored of the transportation field and watching the containerized vessels that were coming in and were more automated into the Vietnam theater of operations, I went to work for Sea Land Service, which was actually the innovator of containerized technology, containerized transportation. And so worked for Sea Land, and later Honeywell Aerospace, then later American President Lines, in a rather diverse field of occupations, everything from operations to accounting and international documentation to sales. I had all the import accounts for the Pacific Northwest for American President Lines. And then I took a 5-year hiatus with Honeywell Aerospace, which was the division that was actually working on undersea acoustic electronics, and went into international marketing for Honeywell, working with foreign military, as well as a lot of offshore drilling, commercial drilling operations, like the floating oil rigs in the North Sea and the like. We did a lot of different, rather exotic technologies that we were selling into those different market areas.
Okay, I'm gonna actually give Ron a little bit to kind of catch up so we can actually get Ron from his youth through the Vietnam War, 'cause you guys are both Vietnam War veterans. So kind of this and kind of
Good.
into the 70s, and then we'll kind of go back and forth because I hope I'll break it up a little bit. So, so Ron, so why don't you give me a little bit of your bio and background?
I was born in Pennsylvania on my way to Austria. My father was career military. Basically lived in Italy, Austria, and Germany until high school. And in the great wisdom, the Army sent my father to Fort Ord as his last tour of duty. And since we've never had a stable home, that's where we settled. Went to high school, college, got a burr up my backside and joined in 66 the Army. Asked for Vietnam, got sent to Turkey, and then got sent from 66 to 72, or from 68 to 72, served in Vietnam. I was a platoon sergeant. Basically, I had 50 men. Everything from security with the Army Security Agency to straight leg infantry to airborne school. And then the last tour I did there, I was running armor in Vietnam. Forgot the deck enough times that finally they put me out. Came back to California, asked to go into reserves, and ended up with 39 years in the service. So,
Wow.
needed a job, so back to college, became a nurse, went to work for Monterey County, then the state of California in the prison system as a hospital administrator, which is how I wound up here because I met my wife in Monterey and she was born here in Reading. She's Robert Dicker's daughter from the old Dicker's store. So taught for a few years, got disabled out of the Department of Corrections, taught for a few years, went to law school, finally says, I need to retire. And my wife says, we're moving here. So I've been here for about the last 15 years.
So I'm trying to think, because I gave you guys some questions to kind of go over and start. You just to tell Patrick, you ended up continuing on with different career aspects, but you ended up, did you end your working life in Caltrans? Is that what?
No, I work for the
I
California Department of Corrections.
Oh, no, actually, I was actually asking Patrick if he was.
Oh, sorry.
So I'm just, yeah, it's going to bounce back and forth a little bit.
Yeah,
so hopefully that's not too confusing.
I think I took you in the container shipping business and the aerospace business. That took me all the way up to about 1998, at which point the company that I was with sold out to a foreign entity. And a number of us wound up in consulting work in the Bay Area to .com startup companies in systems and process types of applications. So business consulting. And while I did that, I also had hooked up and applied with the New Technology and Research Group for Caltrans in Sacramento. So I living in the Bay Area, but actually commuting to Sacramento on a daily basis. Got old pretty pretty quickly. And so I pursued a job with Caltrans District 4 in Oakland, worked in mass transportation, and then competed for a deputy district director job for external affairs for the Bay Area. And did that for several years. And then at some point, my mother, who was then in her 80s, my father had passed away back in the 90s, and mother was living alone on the ranch. And at that point, I thought, I need to get back to Reading, be closer to her. And so we arranged and I pursued a position up here in Caltrans District 2 and mustered out in 2009.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to you, Ron. Just I'm trying to get some idea about your family background a little bit, and then we're going to talk mostly, hopefully, about the North State. And you guys, that's my to be sort of selfish. That's my main interest, to find out what you guys know about North State history. And
when I started looking at my family background, I learned in college about the push-pull relationship of immigration. and found out that my mother's ancestors were Mennonites and Quakers. So they pretty much one side got pushed out of Switzerland and wound up in land owned by the Prince of Orange. And William Penn recruited them to come over on the Concord in 1683. That's the German Mayflower, what's on the US postage stamp. So they settled down as farmers. My other branch of the family was Quaker, who actually beat the German side by a year, coming over with Penn in the original Quaker groups, and eventually moved all the way out to Bucks County, which is a good 30 miles away, and settled as farmers there. And the Mennonite side, my grandmother got a burr and married a Quaker, so she was so far out of the religion that she had to become a Quaker. And during World War II, my mother said she should serve and joined the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, which is the predecessors to the WACs.
Right.
Wound up in Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. And my father's side were all Scots Catholics who the king invited to come over here when they backed the wrong side in the rebellion in 1715, and wound up in Ohio. And he also had the military background, ran away from home after the 4th grade and joined the military. And they met at Jefferson Barracks, and then I'm the result. And it was only the odds that the Army picked where we were going to come. So that's pretty much the background on both sides.
So I'm gonna give Patrick, and then like I said, if it's like I could let you run with it forever, but we're gonna try to figure out where we can kind of
Where do we cut it off?
where do we cut it off? So why don't we start off like with the sort of the as early as far back as you can go, because you went pretty far back. So how far back can you go with family history?
Ron has a much more well-defined lineage. We're probably a bunch of poor Irish Catholics for the most part, with the exception of my German immigrant father, my grandfather, Walter Kahn, who was born in Erspring, Germany, and back in the 1890s, and his father apparently had abandoned his mother, and his mother died, and he was living on a farm with his grandparents, and they wanted him to take over the farm, and he wasn't up for the farm. So he basically ran away and went to Bremen and signed on with a three-masted schooner, apparently, and was a cabin boy starting on a ship's crew, and plied the oceans for a while until.
And what area is this?
This is probably right at the turn of the century, 20th century. And then from there, he was injured and burned aboard ship as the ship was approaching New York, the port of New York. They took him ashore, put him in a hospital, and as a young man, and he, when he got out of the hospital and his burns were treated, the ship had left without him. So it's not like he had a lot of fervor for, immigrating to the United States. So there he was, and his first job was as a steeplejack, hanging from ropes and painting the steeples of the churches in New York, and then worked odd jobs his way out to the Midwest, where he met my grandmother, Lillian McDonald, who was the supervising nurse in an insane asylum. And he had set up in Minneapolis, St. Paul, a business for maintaining different, hospitals and that. And so they met my grandparents met in an insane asylum in St. Paul, Minnesota. Married in I think around 1918, something like that. And they wanted to go, manifest destiny was there for them, so they wanted to go to California. They moved to the San Fernando Valley, buying a chicken ranch sight unseen, which turned out to be an arroyo with probably a bunch of dead chickens and a rather disappointing sort of a threshold impression. But so they started there, and my grandfather told my grandmother, because he was a very enterprising but stern kind of person, I'm leaving you and I won't come back until I have, gainful employment in that. And he went to Long Beach, and lo and behold, during the 30s, he had built up a tire business. And he'd worked for a tire shop with creating molds for tires to when he was in Minneapolis, St. Paul, before he did his maintenance thing. And so he started a tire business, and then during the war years up here, when they were building Shasta Dam, and after the 1932 earthquake in Long Beach, which almost devastated his business, they determined to move north so that he could make truck tires for the big trucks on the dam project here at Shasta Dam. So they came up here in about 1938. My mother was she was born in St. Paul, wound up going to St. Anthony's High School in Long Beach, and then to UCLA. So she was at UCLA when they moved north. And then she followed them up here and got a job as a music teacher with Shasta County Schools, and she had 21 one-room schools. My grandfather set up his tire business here in South Reading. In fact, he had a large building that he shared with Meeks Lumber when they were first getting started. So I think eventually when he moved his business down between Reading and Anderson on Old 99, which is now State Route 273, he eventually sold that business, and he died at a relatively young age. He was as strong and as tough as a person as he was. Both he and my grandmother were pretty tough people. She'd been a cowgirl in Saskatchewan and then wound up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, going to nursing school while she was a governess for a British noble who also had a flat in Winnipeg. And when she finished at Misericordia Nursing School and getting her nursing credential, she went south of the border down into Minneapolis, St. Paul, and that's how she wound up at the mental hospital. So there's a lot of circular motion in this family.
It's follow the bouncing ball, but it's like I was asking you earlier how you kept track of it, because it's a story, which makes perfect sense. You can actually get a linear thing out of it. So Ron, it was trying to get back to sort of some broader history, but I'm also going to say in your lifetime, what sort of significant events, historical events, just events that happened nationally or internationally, I don't want to say shaped you, but you remember and that actually had an effect on you? Kind of any kind of insight into what, something along those lines?
Actually, no, my ancestors probably influenced me more than national news. Growing up Quaker, you're brought up to serve. So anytime there's a need for service, that's what you're kind of expected to do. It becomes second nature. And so that's why I've always done things like the military, the police, nursing, teaching. And the only way I got into history was by moving to Igo and finding that there was nothing written.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't find any history on the area I lived in, except for maybe one paragraph here and there. And so we set about forming a group to resolve that problem. But
So how many books have you written about the North State at this point?
7 now.
7 books.
And there's about 5 more in the works.
Uh-huh. So how challenging is it to kind of dig up this information, to find it? I mean, I'm guessing some of it's very, very minimal in terms of what you have, in terms of what was written down. So how do you do your detective work? How do you find out that information?
Well, some of the material, depending on what they asked, like someone asked us to do a history of the Richland Baptist Church in Ono, Eagle Creek Baptist Church. Almost nothing available. So it's hours and hours and hours on Ancestry and over old documents, going to different libraries and seeing if they have anything that we've missed. And then some things like this last book on the copper towns of Shasta County, it just fell in place. A collector walked in and says, I've got this box of photographs. Can you help me do a book on it? So some of the books, the older and the farther you get away from Reading, the harder it is to do the research.
Right.
The closer you are to Reading, the easier it is to do your research. And like the Shasta County Copper Towns was fairly simple in the sense that the period ran from the 1890s to really the 1920s. So there's abundance of work done on the subject.
Who brought you the pictures, Ron?
Ralph Hollybaugh.
There it is. And Ralph and I were classmates at Shasta High, and he's probably the possessor, if you will, of some of the largest collection of historical artifacts, probably in the county, right, Ron? He's got a tremendous collection, and I can remember when he was collecting bottles way back when. But, he has a great penchant, if you will, for history.
Ralph,
Would you agree, Ron?
well, Ralph Hollybaugh is what a lot of historians consider an enemy, the antique dealer who's destroying things. Ralph's the opposite. He sells antiques to make a living, but he's a collector. And he's a collector that believes history should be shared. So when we were living in Igo, he brought us a stack of material in a town called Bald Hills. Doesn't exist, hasn't existed since the late 1860s.
Yeah.
He wanted to share it, so we got a book done on it. He keeps finding us, no matter which history group we go to, and walks in and says, I've got this collection, and can you help me get it out to the public? So I give all the kudos to Ralph on about half the books I've done.
Now, that's what the Peltier family was out in the Bald Hills too, right? Did you run into them at all?
The Peltiers are from Whiskeytown. They left Whiskeytown when they made the dam. They were one of the few that didn't sell their land. They traded the BLM for sections in Igo. So they own the land that's now the old Piety Hill Cemetery. So the Peltiers moved to Igo. And my wife went to school with a number of the daughters in Shasta High.
Yep. Well, the Peltiers, there were 4 sets of twins.
Yes.
One set died, 3 sets survived, and then there were 3 other kids. And they had 9 kids in their family when I was going to St. Joseph's, and we had 9 kids in our family. And who would invite a family of 9 to dinner? 9 kids to dinner, other than another family of 9? You know, so we did a lot. And Clint Peltier was a timber cruiser. He was the head of the family, and he died in the house fire when the house caught fire just over by Benton Air Park, and it was very tragic back in the early '60s. But Chris Peltier and Judy were the twins that were my age, and Chris and I were very good friends. He passed away a couple of years ago, and he also served in Vietnam as well. So
yeah, he was my neighbor at the ranch in Igo. And he was in the 4th Division as a helicopter pilot in Vietnam.
So and I've heard so many stories about this. Do you guys have an opinion of the Igo Ono names? And do you guys have an opinion about that? I'm sure you probably have an opinion, but I've heard so many Igo Ono or whatever.
And then there's also Ogo.
Yes, I've heard that one as well.
No,
actually, people used to take pictures of the sign because it read Igo, Ono, Ogo.
And not only that, it was spectacularized in Ripley's Believe It or Not. I remember. Okay. Did you ever see that, Ron?
No.
The copy of Ripley's Believe It or Not was, had the IGO, ONO, and OGO, a little article on it that, can you really believe this exists?
So where was that sign?
It was at the bottom on Clear Creek Road.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Ono is a well-defined how it got its name.
Yeah,
Ono is one of these towns who also got its name from the post office. They were.
Yeah, actually, you were talking about that earlier. That's before we went there. So maybe you should give me a little background about these one name, because that was an interesting story. So
Well, there was actually Prairie Diggings Junction, and then miners spread up Eagle Creek. Well, when the county bought the county road in 1862, it bought an existing road that ran from Piety Hill to a sawmill on Eagle Creek, bypassing both the original towns. So within a few years, they'd moved up to where the present town of Ono is, and survived quite well there as a transportation site to mines going north, south, east, and west.
yeah.
But they applied for a post office. And like I said, they had Eagle Creek, Colorado, and they wanted to be Eagle Creek, California. And the post office said, no, this isn't going to work, and refused to give them a post office until they came up with a name. And the miners picked Orofino, and some of the ranchers picked other names. And finally, it went to Reverend Kidder, who was the Baptist minister out there. And he looked in the Bible, and he came up with, and I don't know which book it came from, but he came up with a quote that we shall gather on the plains of Ono. So he proposed Ono. Post office liked it, and it officially we changed the name from Eagle Creek to Ono. Now, when they lost their post office, why they didn't go back to Eagle Creek, I don't know. But they have remained Ono ever since. Now, the Igo name, my guess is it's an old family name, because there's some property out there that was Igo. But the story is that when the Hardscrabble mine was about to undermine the entire town of Piety Hill, the mining company looked for areas close by that were not gold producing, and they found the site at Igo. Well, when they wanted a post office, although most of the books say Piety Hill just quickly disappeared, it actually held on for about 20 years. So Piety Hill is off to one side, Igo's at the other, and when they applied, the post office says, well, you can't be Piety Hill because it's over there. So the name Igo stuck, and the story is that the mine supervisor who was looking for the new location had a son that kept going, Igo, because he wanted to go with his father. But there's no confirmation that that's how it really got its name. And they used to joke that they were going to kick them out, and it's like, oh no, we won't go. So that story is a little conflicting, since the Chinese were never removed from Igo, Ono, Piety Hill, any of the towns in the Bald Hills. They were actually quite well valued because of the rough rock and the terrain, and they did most of the heavy lifting out there.
So was the name Ogo just a play off those two, or was it actually?
Ogo was a combination. Ogo was done by the Forest Service, and it was a fire station out on old Bully Shoop Road.
Yeah.
And it has been moved 3 or 4 times. And originally it was about 15 miles out, enough to be a trip for a day. And so it was called the Ogo Fire Station. And it just happened to be there were a few other ranches right there on Bully Shoop Road, where it goes on Platina Road. So it got the name stuck. But over the years, the Ogo Fire Station kept getting closer and closer and closer to Ono. Well, right now it sits on the other side of the bridge in Ono. So they dropped it off the signs, And we've always just been Igo and Ono since I've been up here, 15 years or so.
Yeah.
No, I grew up here and I had not heard Ogo before. So
Yeah.
That's really
There's
interesting.
very few, once you passed Ono, there was very few until you get out to Patrick's favorite town of Knob, which was Harrison Gulch. And so it was kind of the halfway point between Knob and the end of the county, or between Ono and the end of the county, and put it on the map. So there just wasn't much else out there to name.
So how did you, and I go back to Patrick, how did you get involved with, you're involved with several, both the guys involved with several historical societies. And other than, I mean, how do you, other than having, you know, stories and interests and stuff, how do you specifically get involved with the organizations to help preserve history and pass on the information? How do you get involved with something like that?
I think, you know, just like Ron is a very, very inquisitive person to begin with. And I think that also sort of applies in our family. And my grandfather, Judge Carr, was one of the founders of the Shasta Historical Society back in 1930. And if you drive around the county, and even up in Lassen Park, there's a couple of it's not E. Clampus Vitus signs up there, or plaques. They're Shasta Historical Society, and they were early on. And there was, I think it's just like the passion that Ron was talking about, that at some point you want to say, you know, we should try to preserve when nobody's keeping track of the history of this. And I think there was a number of people, to include May Helene Bacon Boggs, who also had the art collection out at Old Shasta and the like. But there were a number of people that were, I think, historically inquisitive to begin with, and also saw a real need, especially since the second gold rush occurred up in this part of the state at the Redding Bar, Major Redding's bar on Clear Creek, that in fact a lot of this stuff should be documented, and that the local should do it. So our family has been involved. My father, my grandfather, and my mother actually wound up, Marie Carr wound up as president, even at 94, I think she was still involved with the Shasta Historical Society, as well as the Anderson Historical Society, and actually started an initiative, which I think Ron is involved with now, to bring all of the historical societies together, from Ono, from Fort Crook up in Fall River, from Shasta Lake Heritage and Historical Society, and bring all those folks together in sort of an effort to coordinate and at least understand what all information is out there on the history of this, not only this county, but what are the legacies and the linkages to the state and national history. You know, we really underdignify the significance of Shasta Dam until you go back. Actually, I was in Hyde Park at the Roosevelt Museum, the Franklin Roosevelt at Hyde Park in New York. Go in there, and because I wanted to see if they had anything on Judge Carr, because I have a picture of my grandfather on the back of the whistle stop train that Governor Roosevelt, before he was ever president, had whistle stopped in Reading in September of 1930, I think 32. And it's Governor Roosevelt from New York and Judge Carr on the back of this rail car. So I thought, I wonder if this picture is in the archives, the National Archives, at the Roosevelt Presidential Library. And sure enough, there it was. But on top of that were a number of other documents that talked about the criticality in World War II of hurrying up the construction of Shasta Dam so they could get the hydroelectric operation going to basically power the shipbuilding operations down in Richmond and the Bay Area, the Kaiser shipbuilding yards and the like.
Mm-hmm.
And there's quite a bevy, if you will, of correspondence back and forth between the War Utilities Board during World War II and trying to push the completion of Shasta Dam, or at least getting enough water behind the dam to start turning those turbines up at Shasta Dam. You know, so there is a legacy here in the North State, not only of people, but also public works projects extending into the Trinity Lake and Lewiston Lake and Whiskeytown Lake, the Central Valley Project, flood control. The Flood Control Act of 1944 was specifically driven to deal with the flooding that took place annually, which was wiping out ranches and farms up and down the Sacramento River watershed, well into the 40s. And that was the prime motivator for building Shasta Dam. And the collateral benefits were water, recreation and power and the like. But the first and most critical thing was this place used to, when that river would start going, and then you had the Feather River joining in the middle of the winter, you had these raging torrents that would come down these canyons, and you can go to old Sacramento, right, Ron? And that place used to be underwater. If you go into
I've
that,
heard it described as an inland ocean, basically, or inland sea.
and the same thing with the riverboats. The Red Bluff was actually I think there's a book about Red Bluff being the end of the riverboat, where the riverboats would take a lot of the gold mining supplies and that up to as far upriver as Red Bluff. Although Pierce and Redding actually was successful in getting a riverboat all the way to Latona, which is now by the flea market.
Right.
Okay, at Latona, that's the farthest north or up the river that a riverboat ever got, and it was such a pain to get it that far that they decided they didn't want to negotiate or navigate China Rapids and a few of these other things on that river. So, and then eventually the riverboat transportation faded out, I think. But you start looking at public works projects, and actually even the fallout and the impact of that quite frankly, in 1960, the presidential election in 1960, of the 58 counties of California, guess which county had the highest Democratic Party vote or Democrat vote for Kennedy Johnson over Nixon Lodge? Shasta County went 65.2% for Kennedy Johnson over Nixon Lodge. I think Nixon actually won California, but the highest vote was in Shasta County, and I know that because Dad had run Kennedy's campaign up here. But you start looking at, and why? Because of the public works projects. You had Whiskeytown being built, you had Trinity Dam and Trinity Lake, you had Lewiston Dam and Lewiston Lake, and they were punching I-5 to the Upper Sac Canyon, all at the same time that U.S. Plywood was going full tilt, and those were all well-paying union jobs. Shasta County was one of the more affluent counties in the state back in 1960. And if you look at how not only the political demographic shifted, but also because of a lot of intervening kinds of things, the industrial demographic of the North State, and all these public works projects when they dried up, and the spotted owl showed up and a bunch of other things, pretty soon there were some other issues that entered in that affected the economic profile of the North State, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but I sort of look at this and I say, what was happening back then? So it's fascinating when you see the legacy of not only the public works projects, but who was in the leadership and who were the people, who were the movers and shakers. You think back to the 60s, you had Harold T. Biz Johnson, who was the ex-mayor of Roseville, was the U.S. congressman, and you had Pauline Davis from Yuba City, and she was our assembly person. You had the only U.S. senator to ever come from north of Sacramento, Red Bluff High School alumnus Claire Engel, who graduated from Red Bluff High at 16, wound up becoming the youngest DA in the United States, probably at age 23, and graduated from Hastings Law School and passed the bar at 21 years old. All these guys were in congressional seats at the time and probably moved pretty well to bring home the bacon, if you will, and bring home public works projects and public works money to the North State. And Ron, what do you think? Do you agree with that?
I think they all did well, but my concern has always been for the little guy, which
Yeah.
the question was, how do we get the little guy interested in all this? When I first moved here, we had historical groups at Cottonwood, active at Millville, the Reading Museum. They're all closing. And it's like how to get people back into doing history. And one way is the way Shasta Historic and Anderson does, by we have free research. We're trying to get people back in to answer questions. We know it's hard to find resources. So we make resources available. We put articles online.
Yeah.
If we get an email about, someone just wrote me about Treats Alley in Anderson. Well, so we'll try and find the answers for Treat Alley. We find that there's a lot of people that don't have a lot of connection, but are just interested in the history.
Sure.
Like to get it. And right now, there's about 4 groups that if we combine and go together, we can make a clearinghouse to entice more people in. I mean, our group is looking at trying to get high schools to do writing projects for high school writing, to get high school docents, to get, so I really don't know that anyone has the correct answer yet of how to interest people in local history.
Well, let me ask you a critical question and that is, I was just talking with my old roommate from college today about this very thing. Is evolving internet technology and, intelligent IT kind of stuff, is the IT world benefiting? It perhaps increases access for a lot of people to information, but from the standpoint of generating creative expression and research, is it a plus or a minus? How do you perceive technology and the impact of technology on on historical research, and even more importantly, recording history? You are somebody that records a lot of history and you do it very well. But if you and I were gone, okay, and if our generation is gone, is it going to be more videography and less expression in the King's English? Or is it going to be, or is there going to be sort of a resurgence of the written word, if you will?
I took a graduate class in Freudian psychology, at which I walked in the first day and the professor says, you need to go buy these 27 books. We're going to go 1 book a week until we finish them all. And I found that Freud was smart enough to say, I don't know all the answers, but I'm going to write these books that I have ideas for and get them out there so the next generation can look at them and do a better job.
Right.
Well, I look at history the same way. We need to get the history out to the public so that future researchers can then take that material. With what limited resources we have, we make mistakes. There's no author that I've found that's done, including myself, that does 100% perfect job. But if we get it out there, the next generation can do a better job and a better job and a better job. Technology helps us get it out there, but it also comes with that caveat of beware that not everything that's out there is true. A lot of it needs to be researched and checked.
Do you think as a culture, though, that from a behavioral standpoint, that we sort of view a lot of that as waiting to be fed history? Or do you think that there is an activist pursuit, and you have a great passion for going out and doing research, but a lot of this information sort of comes to people without them digging themselves and pursuing it? Am I making sense with this dichotomy?
Yeah, I think that everybody has an innate nature to question where they are and how they got here.
Right. that within the scope
have a
of,
limited scope of Shasta County. But to the extent that we can help them answer that innate question, they have to get to a point where they want to ask it.
yeah.
But when they do ask it, it's Shasta Historical, Anderson Historical, Shasta Lake, Fort Crook that are going to be the ones that will help answer it, because
Mhm.
they're the ones that are still trying to gather everything in. It's
But
a
do you think people actually, as they're
resource.
driving by a Shasta Dam or whatever, and they see it and it's impressive and all the rest of it, do you think they actually go to the next step of saying, gee, I wonder how that got there? To me, that is sort of one of the critical questions around, having a passion for historical research and even asking a lot of questions. Are we still an inquisitive kind of a culture, or do you think we just sort of take spoon-fed information and just say, oh, that's nice?
My concern is we're still an inquisitive nation, except that most of the research requests we get are from middle age and above.
Uh-huh.
That's why Anderson is trying to focus as much on possible of getting elementary students to actually come to the museum.
Yeah.
Getting a high school writing program, even if it's just tell me the story of your family in Shasta County.
That's good, Ron. And I
Gets them
think
to
you've hit on
start.
something critical, because
We,
I sort of look at it, and I usually tell people, they say, well, are you into history? And I'm going, history is 5 minutes ago. I said, we keep thinking history has to be 19th century stuff. And that's not necessarily true. What happened in the 1950s and 60s? In fact, one of the questions that Rob had given us, I think, was what world events were significant to me personally. And as I thought about this, I thought the Korean War, newsreels at the Cascade Theater, okay, during the Korean War, Joe Stalin and the atom bomb, the Cuban Missile Crisis and the assassination of John F. Kennedy while I was at college, Freedom Riders in the South, and of course the Watergate hearings, détente with Russia, and opening trade with China when Zhou Enlai was the deputy prime minister with Henry Kissinger, the polio pandemic and the Salk vaccine, Vietnam and the draft, and innovations in technology like containerized transportation, television, and personal computers. Those are the things that sort of popped into my head just on basically a spontaneous mode. I can recall Sig Krigsman, who had the Coca-Cola plant here. He was they lived down the street from us, and they were one of the first people to ever have a television in Reading. And we'd go down to their house, all the kids in the neighborhood, to watch Pinky Lee and Howdy Doody. This obviously ages me. You can tell I go back a ways, but the whole concept of this new technology, I can recall after Mass, Dad taking us kids over to Johnny Bartosh's cigar store at the downstairs in the Golden Eagle Hotel, and buying the Sunday paper, the Examiner, and we would go home to our house on Olive Street, and my sister and I would lie on the floor, and we'd turn on KBCB radio, and they would have the Sunday funnies, people that would actually be Dagwood and Blondie, and we would follow them in the cartoons in the Examiner, as they would have noisemakers, for things crashing and all the rest of it. And we would basically bring the comics alive on a Sunday morning. This is probably before TV was hitting Reading. And it's fascinating to me what happened locally, because later on in the 60s, Dad and George Flaherty, who was the mayor of Reading, were back testifying before Congress. And Uncle Jim, who was a consulting engineer to the Interior Committee, had heard about a federal communications license that was available. And on the way home, George and Dad decided they were going to get a bunch of investors together, and they built Channel 7. And this, you look back and you're going, things just didn't happen. I mean, there was sort of an evolution. And what you and I have lived through, just in terms of technology advances, you know, and the same thing. I've got a picture of Grandpa Carr. Okay, this is when he was Justice of the Peace, and then down at the Shasta Historical Society, there's a picture of him on a horse in front of Old City Hall. Well, that was 1907, and by 1937, 30 years later, he was president of AAA for California. You know, I mean, you start looking at it and you're going, things just are moving along locally, and it's your point, Ron, right on, is that locally and in our own lives, we are experiencing evolution, you know, and historical evolution in technology as well as political events and the like. And I sometimes wonder if we are as activists in seeking out knowledge and lessons from the past, or if we're simply spoon-fed information and visuals, you know, from media with just accepting it without saying, what does that mean to me, and what are the implications of knowing that happened?
So my question, I guess, to both you guys leading off of that is, do you think, and I have an opinion as well, do you think people are less critical? Are people just, because of how things, you can go to YouTube even, and you can have like 100 different people. Right now I'm doing, because I work in media and stuff, I'm actually on a camera kit. And I've been doing a lot of research over cameras, and there's dozens of those people with ideas about a couple of individual cameras I'm kind of looking at, but they all contradict each other. There's no standard. And it's just whether you believe or agree with the person on this. And I just wonder, you know, think things are critical, and do you think things like, I mean, sort of use the word correctly or not, democratizing things like Wikipedia, which is yeah, that kind of thing. Is it critical? Is it helping? Is it good? Or does it and I guess everything has a dark side, but what do you guys think in terms of how people were critical, or Wikipedia is a good thing, or?
Those things that influenced me when I moved up here was not the positive. There's lots of positive things to talk about in Shasta County. It's the negatives that don't get in history. The state of California has a long history. You can read a book like Murder State, of things we did to the Native Americans, the Chinese, Black families in Redding. There's a large negative history that needs to be history, so history does some good. I don't know that Wikipedia, anyone who, it's like, you need to say what really happened. History needs to say the good with the bad to get a dialogue. If we just IT it to death and give it lots of, it's like my real hate is the likes and dislikes on like feedback things that stores want, what's Facebook wants, that other groups want. It takes away the definition of history. History is both that which is good and which is bad.
Right.
If an IT unit does it that way, it does give access to Native Americans to get their story out. Good. But if it just feeds us the history we want to hear to make us feed good, that's bad. So I love IT because I couldn't be doing all the research and everything at home, but I really fear IT if we let it become a democratized society of someone telling us what we need rather than having a discussion of how do we prevent this from happening again.
You know, Ron, you're
to get into the future.
You're hitting on something I think really sort of critical, and it has to do with our culture and our behavior. You know, and I told a priest one time, I said, you know, if I go to church at some point before I go to, when I first arrive, I sort of go through the 10 Commandments. I said, but I always struggle to get past the first commandment, which is false idols. And I said, the irony of it all is that my false idol isn't I'm basically in data overload. So it's not even, I'm not getting much out of it other than just trying to, tread water in data overload. So it's, to me, it's often a question of, do I have the ability to seek out, something? Do I have an appetite to perform my life ethically and looking at the issues that you're talking about, about racial discrimination and, sexual discrimination and harassment and all those things? How am I driven? What is my ethical nature? And am I driven to ask the questions? And it's interesting, when I lived in Chicago, I went to it was a seminar on meditative practices, but I thought the best part of the evening was this little preamble talk where this guy says, the money line came when he said, we are creating the greatest generation of reactive thinkers in the history of the human species at the expense of our contemplative dimension. And I thought, wow, what a money line. He says, I thought, what's that? Does that mean that everybody's waiting for the next instruction set, but nobody's asking why? And as a culture, as we evolve as a society, are we driven to still have an appetite to not only think critically, but in the area that you're talking about? It's not just the facts that are coming at us, but also the other dimension, which is almost the irrational dimension, which is feelings. How do we feel about the facts? And oftentimes people are outraged, and oftentimes people just say, I don't want to think about that. It's too much to think about. And to me, it's fascinating to ask the question, who are we as a culture? Where are we going in this country and in our technology intensive world right now? And is technology always sort of good? Is it bad? Or is it simply, do we use technology the way that was, originally hopefully intended? And to me, what you're talking about, Ron, is right on.
I think that Mr. Gates in his program has found the answer that we all kind of look for, in the sense that he starts research not knowing where it's going and is honest about what he finds. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but it's all history.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the reasons, it's one of the few shows I watch on TV, is because it's history as real history. So, and yes, I think we are moving more towards a non-questioning world. And hopefully events like this one will make at least a few question.
Well, it's Joe Friday, right? Just the facts, ma'am. And of course, it's more than just the facts. It's what do the facts tell us, and what are the rules and mores that we set up as a society that cause us to interpret the facts and then to make some ethical or moral determination as to what we think of that.
And of course, you go one step further with, how you report it and what you report based on your ethics and your beliefs. So it's, which always muddles stuff up. I think that's just how people work, unfortunately.
And if your question was a good one about significant events, because every one of those, I had a strong feeling one way or another about every one of those events. When it came to the atom bomb, and we were at the nuns at St. Joseph's, were having us do the bomb drills, okay, crawling under the desk and all the rest of it. That was the emotions of fear, flight or fight. Vietnam, there were a lot of very strong passions and feelings around that whole episode. And there are strong feelings right now. All you got to do is turn the TV on. And it's fascinating what the pundits can do to excite you. But you have to ask yourself, am I reacting in a reactive mode, or am I reacting in a contemplative mode? Am I driven by contemplation and sort of weighing it against my code of ethics and conduct? And to me, it's a question of what you learn probably at an early age, how you're, what culture you come out of and what you're taught.
Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to figure out where we're at.
Who inspired me when I was growing up? John F. Kennedy, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about his private life, but he had the ability to charm. And I think he was a very charming personality to the press. He was straightforward. He was eloquent. He also was not perceived necessarily. I think my father and a lot of people were enamored because he was 43 years old, right, when he was elected president. My father inspired me. You know, when he was DA, they actually tried to assassinate him because he put his foot down. And even though he was getting pressure from people on city council and elsewhere to sort of go light on illicit activity in Shasta County, he was right out of Georgetown Law School and said, I took an oath and I will live up to my oath. And there was a guy named Smiling Jack Lacey that was hired by some locals to kill him. Mm-hmm. And I think Governor Warren's investigators were involved, and Sheriff Sublett finally arrested Smiling Jack Lacey to the floor of a Greyhound bus, and he was on his way to assassinate my father, who was basically living up to his oath.
So what year is this?
That was it would have been 1939. He started, matter of fact, he met with Earl Warren in a hotel room because he was getting pressure locally to sort of go light on some of the activity. And he went down and met with the Attorney General before a governor, Attorney General Earl Warren in San Francisco. And he said, there's concern that if I start enforcing too much, all the illicit activity will move over the county line into Tehama County. And I want your commitment that, as Attorney General, we're trying to eradicate illicit activity. And there were a lot of people that were, community leaders in that Dad actually had to go after, that were breaking the law. Mm-hmm. And I'm certain Judge Carr, his father, knew all those guys and grew up with them and everything else. So it was not an easy thing. But I will never forget when Dad passed away. The Knights of Columbus stood guard over his casket at Sacred Heart Church overnight. Basically his casket lay in state overnight at Sacred Heart Church in Anderson. Well, a lot of his old friends and people that, respected him, basically, and then they had the 21 gun salute the next day. My mother, bearing 9 kids, and as well as housing her paraplegic sister-in-law and my grandmother, and a phenomenal energy. She was a music teacher in the county, taught in 21 one-room schools around the county, and was always involved, as Ron knows, she was involved with the Shasta Historical Society, and she was very passionate about certain issues, and she would show up to testify before the Board of Supervisors or Reading City Council on issues that she felt strongly about. And then the other people that actually influenced me, I think, or inspired me, were, and you're probably with this too, Ron, a lot of the old movie stars. And you can think of the ones that you always thought they had great parts. One of the ones that was like that was Gregory Peck, in his role in The Big Country, On the Beach, To Kill a Mockingbird, Moby Dick, MacArthur, Sidney Poitier, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, or In the Heat of the Night is Mr. Tibbs, right? And James Stewart. I look at those people, those personalities, along with the roles they played, were always inspiring to me. They were always men of noble intent, trying to do what was right. The same thing with Kirk Douglas in Lonely Are the Brave and Spartacus. So I think back to when I was in high school, and a lot of these are movies that were in the 50s and 60s, but they really had a profound effect on how I viewed my world, and they sort of shored up your own ethical orientation about stand up for what's right, have some courage to stand behind your values. Anyway, then you said, what is one thing that I never want to forget? That we're only here for a short time, and it's important how we treat each other. Your questions were good ones, Rob, as far as
I tried it because I told them from like 80 questions. So I tried to get what I was trying to get out of this. And I think one of my questions was, what do you guys see for the future of Reading? But I'm not going to go there because it's like, what does that mean? Because I mean, Reading professionally shocks me. It's like we have a skyline now. It's just, how did that happen? It was just, it's happened pretty quickly. But I think the question is, what do you see for in terms of the viability, and what do you want your I guess now your historical societies to do? You have touched on this, and what do you want? What do you think might be a practical way in the future to kind of stay relevant and viable as organizations? I mean, I'll throw that to Ron first to see what you might think about in terms of the future.
Well, I think the only way to stay viable is to continue to address the needs of the public. So I think all history groups have to evolve the same way people evolve over time. We've seen so many close that I think the only way is to look at it and say we all have the same problems. We have trouble fundraising. We have trouble getting docents. We have trouble with this. We have trouble finding research. And the only way to do it is to expand, not in the sense of taking away individual sections of the county from various groups, but by coming together and forming a larger research group, a larger support group with common aspirations and common problems.
Yeah.
I think if we try to all go it alone, we're going to be with the dodo bird on Mauritius Island gone.
So is there an existing coalition of your historical museums or societies?
There's the answer. There's a two-part answer. One is that the historical societies get together. Mother started that actually, Ron, probably about 10 years ago, getting all the historical societies in the county together. And two, what Ron is suggesting was the vision and really the strategic question that confronted the, quote, Shasta Historical Society, which when it was looking at itself strategically, we said, are we the Reading Museum, the historical museum, or are we a county-wide historical society? And in 1930, the original vision of Judge Carr and the people that started that was that it was a county-wide effort that Ron is sort of hinting at, where you had people out in Ono, you had people in Fall River, you had people up at Castella, and they all had really peculiar histories. But this one umbrella organization was sort of set up to grab all that and put it into a central repository, if you will. And now that we have digital technology and all the rest of it, the concept of the Shasta Historical Society was hopefully migrating towards what Ron is talking about as a platform for all historical societies to maybe be able to, you could do a computer link if you were down in the Bay Area and had a question about Knob or about Ono, that you could go to the Ono Historical Society via the Shasta Historical Society. So you have basically an umbrella organization that has the resources necessary to host a lot of satellite organizations. The problem you run into oftentimes is, and Ron has already hinted to this, is the financial or fiscal viability of all these smaller organizations, that we're all sort of in competition with each other, if you will, for what scarce resources there are in the county to perpetuate historical research, and achieve that end. And I think trying to get everybody on the same page, to me, is a monumental, much more demanding and daunting task than one would think, especially when there's a certain amount of pride in authorship, and there's a certain amount of intimacy that attends to being down in Anderson Cottonwood or being up at Shasta Lake. And everybody's got their own special little histories. So then it's a question of what is it that this umbrella organization, if it is the Shasta Historical Society, what is it doing? And is there a Reading museum, a Reading Historical Museum? We have Turtle Bay, but I don't know how much of Turtle Bay. Ron, do you have an idea of how much is the historical research as a repository of Reading history in the Reading area that the Turtle Bay is?
They have an extensive collection. They have an
Right. But do they do it?
artifact collection. They tend to go at it in artifact display by putting up displays rather than, which is limited for some of the other groups.
Right.
Turtle Bay has found its niche and is doing fairly well. They're looking at rotating displays,
Mm-hmm.
large material. It's a piece of the puzzle that's needed. But
Is there a Reading Historical Society? Maybe that's the strategic question.
the Shasta Historical Society still is on that brink of are we representing everybody, which is coming to pass, that we're all talking, we're all sharing.
Right. Sure.
Like you asked about the books I wrote. One was written from the Ono group, given to Shasta to help them out. Of the next set of books, one was done by Anderson Historical.
Uh-huh.
4 other books we did, or actually 5 other books we did at Anderson Historical were given to Shasta to help them out. We're looking to get where we can help, where we can maintain individuality, but solve common problems.
Right, right.
That's where Shasta Historical comes in. They have a professional staff. They can provide seminars that other people can share.
Right.
And that's a work in progress. It isn't, we're not there yet, but at least we're heading that way.
Right. But you didn't answer my question. Is it a Reading Historical Society, or is there such a thing?
I think when I first moved here, it pretty much was an old Shasta Reading Historical Society.
Yeah, I think you're right. There was a bias.
Progressively expanded its outreach to include other areas. Because
Right.
these people aren't from one area of the county. It's like B.F. Loomis.
Yep.
Daughter went to high school in Anderson. He had a photographic shop in Anderson. He married into the Loomises from Ono.
Right.
And their son had the shop in Reading.
That's the guy who took the pictures at the Lassen eruption? Okay.
He's B.F. Loomis, right? But he got interested in photography.
Yeah.
And went to another Loomis shop in Reading. Well, that Loomis isn't a relative, but he happened to meet the sister of the guy who was running the shop.
Right.
Mrs. Loomis got married and became Mrs. Loomis. Kind of one of those Roosevelt stories.
Oh, yeah.
Stayed. But it's one of those, so people in this county tend to move to, they're at Shingletown in the summer, they're at Anderson or Reading in the winter, they have mines here. We all share a common history.
So if I catch your drift a little bit, that we've sort of evolved, and it's almost like goes around, comes around, because if you go up to Lake Helen at Lassen, there's a big plaque there that tells about Lake Helen and the Bumpuses, and I think that, and that the plaque says Shasta Historical Society. The same thing with the Nobles Trail plaque over on the Park Road heading towards Manzanita Lake. That's a historical society. The same thing with Fort Reading over off Dersh Road. That's a plaque that was put there by the Historical Society. So what you're talking about is that at some point, and I think when my grandfather was on the original board for the Historical Society, Shasta Historical Society, it was county-wide, and they were looking at all kinds of locations all around the county, and they were putting up plaques. And, I think the same thing down there with the Reading Adobe, which actually that plaque isn't even close to the Reading Adobe. It's off Main Street in Cottonwood, just right across from the auction yard. But, so that was the scope, I think, that the original Historical Society was looking at, was to be the host for the entire county. And then what you wound up with eventually is these different satellite locations, as they built the dam or did other things, there was such a plethora of information available that locally they started their own societies. And to me, it is an interesting strategic challenge, if you will. But what do I know?
So that's another history too. Anyway, you guys, I think we're going to wrap it up here. It's actually, we could keep going because.
Has this accomplished what you wanted to
Oh,
accomplish?
I didn't. Well, actually, I think I had an idea, but it went in a better direction than I anticipated. So, because I was like, you have these parameters of what you're looking for, but I think you're sort of what you guys ended up talking about, which I didn't even anticipate. You're talking about the history of the history, almost, which is really very interesting. It's because it's you're not just political, but just some stuff that I wasn't aware of. I mean, are there pictures somewhere of Igo Ono Ogo that exists still somewhere?
Yes.
Ralph Oliver probably has a few, I would imagine, if anybody does.
That just fascinates me because actually, and especially place names. And I have an idea for a show someday when I have free time, whatever that means, to do a show about place names and where they came from.
Well, who did that book, Ron? Was it Steger? Did she do the place names book? Shasta County place names?
He was one of them. There was an
Dottie
earlier
Smith?
edition, but Sager did the place names of Shasta County.
That's what I thought. Yeah, it wasn't Dottie Smith, it was Steger, right?
No, Dottie didn't do that book.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I appreciate you guys' time. This has actually been really interesting. Like I said, it's better than I know that I didn't expect much out of it, but I was sort of trying to structure. But it's been a better conversation, I think, than talking about, like I said, the history of the history of the North State.
Well, let me tell you, I learned a lot tonight about Ron Jollum, and I think I've underappreciated the breadth of the writings that you've done, Ron, and also you've imparted opinions to me about things, but on occasion through the Anderson Historical Society. But you are just a remarkable human being as far as the things that you've done that are, truly a credit to you and a great credit to the county, and, to trapping history and putting it in some sort of cogent format so that you excite people to say, we've been this way before, especially when you start looking at Superfund sites on Iron Mountain and all the rest of it. All of a sudden it brings some significance, to what it is that modern day concerns are when it comes to environmental policy or respecting different cultures. And, your pursuits, my friend, are very impressive.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
It's all a work in progress. And actually, I'm hoping I can tap you guys for some other stuff because I have some ideas about local history, and you guys seem to be a really, really great resource in terms of that. So with that, I'm going to thank you again, and I appreciate your guys' time, and I'm glad you were able to both show up this evening and have a very good conversation.
Very good.
Thank
Please
you.
give Candy my best too.
Will do.
Okay.
All right. Good night.
Good night.